I'm Joris Delanoue, CEO, co-founder of Fairmint. At Fairmint, we bring equity on-chain by turning cap tables into smart contracts. And of course, when we work with private companies, privacy is something very important. So today I'm very excited to moderate this panel on the rise of privacy chains. And I'm joined today by the sharpest mind in the industry, building in the space, starting with Omar, the CEO of Aleo, who raised 300 million, right?
Yes.
So hi Omar. Eran, CEO of Shielded Technology.
Right.
And you are in New York as well, right?
I'm New York based. We're the labs behind the Midnight Network.
Awesome. And we have Rob with zkVerify, Horizen Labs. You raised 15 million, right?
Yeah, not enough. Really loud.
Not yet. All right. We have Yuval, CEO of Digital Assets, the company creating the Kenton Network, who just announced a big fundraising, right? 140, 50. Yeah, the figures keeps increasing. And finally, we have Omar, who is a vice president business dev at zkSync, who raised also 250, right?
Yes, that's right.
So that's nearly $1 billion today on stage, dedicated to privacy.
That's a nice way to put it. There's $1 billion on stage.
On-chain privacy. So I will try to have we are a lot of panelists, so let's make the panel. We have less questions finally than we had initially, but we'll start with a small icebreaker question. What excites you most about privacy chain right now? Go ahead.
Well, I think privacy is the final frontier for crypto. When you look at the early web, when HTTPS came about, it unlocked a ton of value for e-commerce, and it was the first time that people could suddenly trust that they could put credit card numbers over the web, that they could create accounts, that they could keep personal sensitive data and have it be transmitted securely over the web. I think we're seeing the same rise happening in Web3 with blockchains today, that we're in this very early era where right now there's very little of crypto rails that are actually being moved on end-to-end encrypted payments. And the opportunity here is to translate and move everything onto end-to-end encrypted rails. And that is a huge unlock for value in crypto. It means you can start to enable things like payroll, like payments that are going to be secure so that only the sender and the receiver see that data, and it's not something that's openly accessible to everybody that's viewing the blockchain.
I like what Howard said, but one sentence. I think what excites me is the new regulation that passed through just last week or got into law on Friday with stablecoin bill, but equally thinking about, I don't know if folks are following Tornado Cash trial that could have implications or at least some correlation to how the industry and regulators think about privacy and what privacy enhancing technologies need to be about.
All right, I never thought I would say this, guys, because I'm one of those early cypherpunk wannabes that launched one of the first privacy coins out there, which was definitely not a regulatory compliant thing. But what excites me now is we're actually at that stage where we're literally moving past ideology, and I predict that the biggest kind of the highest usage we'll see over the coming year of privacy technologies in our industry will be probably regulatory compliant.
Awesome. Yuval?
Yeah, so I think that what was said by Howard about being able to do payments for payroll, credit card is a very good point. I would just venture to say that currently most chains out there don't allow the issuers to also have control over their books and records, and I think that privacy requires also control, so some SUI validators cannot make your transactions be forgotten.
Yeah, I'd say we've had privacy chains for a number of years already, but I think what's different now is that if you are looking to build with privacy in mind, you can finally do it without the trade-offs, without having to give up on interoperability, without giving up on composability, performance, access to all the best industry tooling, developer experience, etc. So I think right now from a builder's perspective, whether you're an institution or an enterprise or a startup, you can now start to build with privacy in mind without having to make those trade-offs that we've seen a lot of institutions do in the previous cycles.
Awesome. Thank you. So let's talk about the tension in the market. First question, can privacy and compliance truly coexist?
Yes. Look, privacy tech itself is an opportunity to improve compliance. And this is something that I think has not been emphasized enough. What I mean by this is that today, when you are on the web trying to prove who you are, when you're trying to KYC, you have to hand over all of your data to the counterparty, which is insane because what we are doing on the web is creating these massive honeypots of all of our PII. Like everyone is getting databases hacked. This is leaking all of this data. One example of why this is such an important opportunity is that privacy tech allows you to now reveal and selectively reveal information about yourself. So using zk, for example, zero knowledge proofs, I can now selectively disclose, for example, that I'm over the age of 18 without actually revealing to you my date of birth. And this is something that is very topical as many states are looking at age verification now. But even more so, I can prove to you that I am not from an OFAC sanctioned country without revealing to you my nationality. I could also, if my bank linked this, I could prove to you that I'm an accredited investor without revealing to you my exact net worth or how much my bank balance is. And this is what privacy tech actually unlocks. And that's something that has not been talked about enough. It hasn't been used enough. And I think what you're going to see over the next few years is people start to try these things because it's going to be more and more pertinent for the safety of the web.
Omar, you wanna interact on this? Compliance and privacy?
Yeah, they can definitely exist, and I agree with his statement, but I also agree with the control statement from Yuval as well. At zkSync, we've launched what we call Providiums, which are essentially private enterprise-grade layer 2s. And the main idea is that you have, if you're an enterprise building this layer 2, you have privacy by having control over the data. You essentially hold it either in a third-party private DA layer like a Celestia Eigen, or you hold it in your own private servers. And you're essentially just validating using zero-knowledge proof that everything happening is fully valid. So no data leakage, nothing goes out there. And you also have, you can have things like selective disclosures built in. So if you need to verify to a third party, that capability is all built in. So I think, yes, privacy and compliance at this point, with the technologies being built, whether it's zk, whether it's something else, yeah, they definitely should exist in the same plane.
Yuval, you want to react?
Yeah, I think that they can work hand in hand as long as you define privacy correctly. And I think that as someone whose co-founder was at the Technion team that built Zero Knowledge, I find Zero Knowledge to be sometimes confused with privacy. I find it to be more of an anonymity solution, which in my opinion does not go hand in hand well with compliance.
Rob, privacy and compliance.
Yeah, I mean, like I'd like to look 5 or 10 years in the future and think it's just going to be like compliance by default. It'll basically be cryptography with automation, and it'll be now where everything is kind of segmented and you have compliance, like a whole industry baked around compliance. And sorry for this industry, but I think a lot of that's just going to be automated, and we're going to use technology to do it. I do think that, so I am a proponent of Zero Knowledge, but also other solutions for tech, whether it's a trusted execution environment, whether it's a private L2 that's completely configurable by the enterprise, whatever it is, like we're going to see just kind of a convergence of these technologies, and then ultimately it'll just be cryptography and automation, and that'll just be the default.
Eran.
So I'd agree with what everybody already covered. Compliance and privacy are not at odds with each other. We've got rules like GDPR, HIPAA, and others that actually require privacy. But one area that everybody talked about is data privacy. One area that people rarely talk about is metadata privacy. What we've seen is technologies that were attempting to shield their tokens in order to protect metadata got into trouble, like Monero and Zcash, because you could buy a little bit of Monero and I can give it to Rob here, and the regulator will say, well, you just did money laundering. So I think we need to evolve blockchain technology to solve not just for data privacy, but also metadata privacy.
You can give me Monero any day, Eran.
All right. So another tension question, like, is zk really safe? And yeah, for the audience, ZK, zero knowledge. So who want to start?
I mean, I have a take on this one. Look, like, I think there's, we're here at a very unique time because the Tornado Cash trials are ongoing right now. And I think that this is something that we should be addressing as an industry to explain what this implicates for us. Any new technology has good actors and it has bad actors. And you can use a new technology for good and for bad. And I think the best example of, by analogy, is if you look at the early internet itself, there were good and bad actors. Like take, for example, Napster versus Spotify. Both are softwares that allow you to download and listen to music. One said, let's circumvent the system and give the music for free. And the other said, let's integrate with the system and charge users and abide by licenses and give users a great experience for listening to music. The same is happening with ZK. There are folks who are trying to use the technology to circumvent and to hide what's going on, and there are others who are trying to build technology to comply with the institutions, the regulations, and the necessary compliance pieces. And I think that is the way to look at any new technology. So from my view, ZK can be used for safe and for good reasons, but you need the right actors at the table doing it.
I agree with that. Who wants to?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with ZK being used for good and bad. I actually think that the problem is that in financial transactions, if you have an outcome that depends on the inputs being correct, and you're effectively trusting a black box to tell you the inputs are correct, we are opening the door for some pretty disastrous outcomes. We know that Zcash had a bug where you could mint coins out of thin air. So I just want everybody just to assume we're going to have a stable coin that is minted in a Zcash. We all trust the outputs to be correct. And then we find out that there's a money tree bug. You could just mint stable coins out of thin air. You go into a DEX, you buy Bitcoins, and great. By the time the bug gets found, you have no idea what is the financial damage, what coins are good versus bad. So our view is that privacy, especially when it comes to financial services, is the ability to share information on a need-to-know basis rather than to hide the inputs from the players that have financial consequences on them being correct.
Yeah.
Okay, I was just going to jump on that because we inherited that Zcash bug, so I totally empathize with that. That was horrible. that kind of war gaming with the Zcash team to actually fix that in real time, for the community. But so I guess that's my point is the inner mathematician in all of us, and we all have an inner mathematician, is probably screaming, of course ZK is cryptographically provably secure, but the reality is we have human beings implementing these proof systems and implementing the software, and obviously there could be bugs in it. So where I see the biggest risk in ZK as a class of technology isn't in the theoretical underpinnings by any means, it's in the implementations. And we're implementing some pretty sophisticated systems these days, and not just the actual implementation of kind of like the core code base, but I'll give you one example is we're launching a dark pool, like private kind of regulatory compliant dark pool in the base ecosystem. And we're doing this like soon. And one of the edge cases is if you interact with this dark pool with the safe wallet on Ethereum, very popular multi-sig on Ethereum, you're actually inadvertently publishing to the world one of the two private inputs that you would have to access your fund. So this is just one of those things where somewhere between the mix of user interface and kind of underlying code bases, you can inadvertently just steer people to make not the best decisions and have negative outcomes. But we're getting better.
Yeah. So I think ZK is already providing some safety, but not totally. In the sense of you can put data encrypted on chain, but you just created a honeypot for any attacker to just go after. With ZK, you keep the data in the wallet and just put attestation on chain. But to the points made here, beyond just the technology perhaps having a bug, there's also the matter of time. I have a friend who champions a quantum computing company. I asked him, how safe are we? And there was silence on the line. So I don't know if they've hacked us already, but eventually they will. So what we need is not just the technology that is good for today, but a technology like upgradable snarks that could over time evolve to catch up with whatever threats come our way.
Yeah, I think yes, theoretically there probably is not that much wrong with ZK. A lot of the issues that we see in the market that generally happen does come around with the implementation, which is the engineering, the platform building, etc. And so you have to look at anyone that is using or building zk-based systems. There needs to be a plethora or a spectrum of different security apparatus built in place. It can't just be the zk is the only stop line in defense. You kind of, at the Matter Labs, we kind of look at it as like a Swiss cheese of defense apparatus where you have multiple different layers. So you might add TEEs on top of that. And then I think now we're also adding TDX. So we have 3 different proof layers to build it. You then also need to make sure that, okay, whatever they're building, is it open source? Can you actually trace all the audits, and are they actually top-line audits? We've spent more than $10 million over the past 3 years on just audits alone, and we'll continue to spend tens of millions of dollars on auditing our system because, yes, the ZK as a system of validating transactions or even for privacy is relatively still new, and doing it at scale where you have lots of value at potential risk, you need to have multiple lines of defense when you're building these things. So if anyone is looking at different ZK applications, would heavily suggest looking at, okay, how do they actually secure it? What audits have they done? And generally, what is their view on their security platform and everything?
All right, so I have a quick question that wasn't planned. But this morning I was chatting with someone from a board of a large company, and the company is private. Bringing their cap table on chain today is source of concern precisely because they risk that someone might retro-engineer the valuation of the company, or they can have a predatory action just because you see that all the employees are exercising their options. How do you see those privacy chain? And we talk about ZK, but I'd like to mention also like what we see now with R3 now working with the Solana Foundation, even one in Asia, or even Provenance, the blockchain from Figure that is trying to come back, and of course the Canton Network. Like, what's your take? How do you think that we can guarantee this privacy to a board member like I had a call with this morning?
I'll just, I guess my every time I talk to ZK initiative, eventually is saying there is going to be a mechanism for disclosure. And I guess my point is, if you're going to disclose the inputs, I just, this is where I fail to kind of understand, right? So our approach is, the definition for us of privacy is very similar to contract law, which is, can you actually program the privacy perimeter into the smart contract so you don't have what happens today on L1, which is just by definition, fully replication of state to every node in the system. So on Canton, it's actually the smart contract that defines what is the replication perimeter. So you do have just a disclosure on a need-to-know basis. And then you could choose. It's not just privacy for everything and no privacy for everything. It's you could actually, so for example, Circle, when they're implementing USDC, the sender and the receiver would only be available for the issuer, the sender, and the receiver to know about that. And the notional would be public permissionless. Like, everybody would be able to see that. So my biggest question all the time to ZK folks is, if you're going to allow disclosure of some of the inputs, then why do you use zero knowledge to begin with?
Well, I would be glad to answer this one. Look, I think there's many ways to look at information disclosure. The way that we've done it on Aleo was to bake in view keys across the entire stack. So from the most broad level of there's an account view key, down to every transaction has its own view key, down to every state transition has its own view key, down to every record has its own view key. And you can programmatically define in smart contracts the requirement to disclose those keys as part of the smart contract code itself. And so this gives the ability to allow people to design a program based on what their business requirements are. And from my point of view, it's not about everything needs to be black or white, that it has to be all private or all public. It's about a spectrum. Like, not every application needs to be fully private. For example, maybe I want to make anonymous donations to a charity, and I don't want to reveal who I am, but I want to reveal how much I donated. You know, that's an example where I want to have some spectrum. And for example, when it comes to governance, let's say we all want to vote, but we don't want to reveal how I voted, right? We just want to see the tallies for that vote. And so, you know, this is another example where it's not about it being black and white, it's about selectively disclosing. But I think to another point that was brought up here is, like, I think the most important thing for these folks that, like, these board members that want to know that they truly have control is the fact that zk allows you as the end user to own your data, meaning you get to decide when that information gets disclosed, and the smart contract developer gets to program in when that information needs to be disclosed. Whereas, you know, my concern is that if we move it up to the validator level, the concern is that governments can come to validators and force threshold decryption of information. The user doesn't truly own their own data then in that case.
I would agree with Howard. We do the same thing. I don't think there is one ring or one method to rule them all. You can have data on chain with viewing keys. You can have data in the wallet and just put an attestation. You can have data public on the chain. You have the plethora of options. Sometimes you were asking about compliance, right? Sometimes you need to keep data private and then only disclose it to your accountant or to a regulator or to your employer. You have the ability as a user or as the DApp to have that selective disclosure and have a rational privacy approach to what you share.
Can I just say what they said?
But I want to challenge it, because take a stablecoin issuer, and they said we want to have disclosure of the transactions because we need to comply with AML KYC. You don't own your data anymore, because once you have disclosed it to them, they can just persist your data, and now the government can come to the stablecoin issuer and tell me, hey, tell me all of Howard's financial transactions. So that's kind of my point, is by having disclosure, you have effectively, in my opinion, took the value proposition of zk, which is I want to prove an output without any disclosure. That is, at least for me, the premise of zero knowledge. So I agree with you about what you said, it's not binary. That's effectively the example I give with USDC. My question is, once you have disclosed information out of a zk, your data is not yours anymore, because whoever you disclose it to can persist it, whether you like it or not. And now, in order to rely on GDPR, you're back to Web 2, where you're saying, hey, you remember when I disclosed that information to you? I now want you to delete it. And that's my circular question is, in order to comply with all of these rules, you would have to disclose information. Once you have disclosed information, my question to you is, why did you use zero knowledge to begin with?
I think we should probably separate out zero knowledge for the use of privacy versus use for verifying and validating transactions. So, yes.
That's why I said, depend how you define privacy.
Yes. So on our take on privacy, I think it's somewhat similar to Canton's, is that you're not essentially using zero knowledge proof per transaction to hide what is being done. You're essentially using it to validate, yes, everything is correct. I own the keys to this wallet that is signing it. There's no double spend. And so this allows you to have a private layer too, because then the operator just holds the data back, right? And they're just admitting, okay, here's the zero knowledge proofs that every user within this layer 2 that I have is operating correctly. Every single transaction is fully valid. Here's a zero knowledge proof verification, in which case then selective disclosures, okay, fine. Like the point isn't necessarily to obfuscate the
Very
input.
similar to scaling. Scaling uses the same thing.
Yes.
I want to compress transaction, and I want to prove that I compress the transaction correctly.
That's not privacy. That's just passing on state.
Yeah, that's just state compression though. Like, look, in my view, the goal is this. On the protocol level, where everyone can see every block and every transaction, there needs to be an option for full end-to-end encryption for that data. And then when it comes to the actual providers, for them to comply with their requirements, they need to be able to produce information that is selectively disclosed on that level, right? It's the same as in the internet as we know it today. When I'm using, when I'm signing into my JP Morgan account, I need to ensure that that information being sent over the open web, over the wire, is truly end-to-end encrypted. But my bank is going to know my information, and I want to make sure that when I sign into my bank, my mother, my grandmother, my best friends can't see my bank account balance, because that breaks the user journey of money, right? And so this is where the selective disclosure comes into value here.
Yeah, we're in total agreement. My only point then, zero knowledge is a very expensive way to do that encryption.
Well, It's a question of what gives mathematical certainty, though. You know, you want to know that this is truly going to be statistically sound on the network, that people aren't going to be breaking that encryption over the web. And you know, I would say there's many privacy solutions out there. Some are reliant upon hardware assumptions, where you're assuming that the vendor itself is not going to break that, or that the government's not going to force decryption of that information. And you have also even more expensive schemes than ZK. ZK has come down, there's like a Moore's law of scaling for ZK that has made it incredibly cheap over the past decade, and I think it's only getting better as the years go on.
I was just going to say, the cost curve's collapsing for ZK. So yes, you're correct.
Sorry, I wasn't just cost of calculation, the cost of risk from building composable transactions, general purpose languages, and it's not literally just
So
You choose the technology that is right for the challenge.
So as we can hear, there is still a risk, right? But despite this risk, it seems that privacy now is really inevitable on chain.
it's a feature, not a bug anymore.
Yeah. So can you explain why and what do you see as a big market going and embracing this privacy chain in the next 12 months?
I don't know. Look, somebody once said that Bitcoin is like Twitter for your bank account, right? Everything is shared. Everything is disclosed. I can't see big business, or actually most individuals, just wanting to have everything public on chain. It just doesn't make sense. Life has both a private part and a public part. We need to have, to Howard's point, the discretion and kind of ownership over our data on what is being shared and with who, under what conditions, like, you know, programmable privacy, is how we're going to bring Web 3 and Web 2 together. We have DeFi and TradFi. They can become Fi if we can solve this privacy element.
I'll venture one guess out there for kind of use cases you asked over the next year using this tech. I would say identity credentials. So we're already seeing governments issuing like identities that could be used digitally that we're actually going to be verifying with Web3 infrastructure. So it's kind of, I think that would be probably one no-brainer use case that just scales massively. And then I'll leave it to the other guys for some other guesses.
I mean, everybody is talking about stable coins, but nobody's talking about private stable coins. And I think that this is a missed narrative, a missed opportunity. And the reason for that is, today, if I go to a coffee shop and I tap to pay with any USD stablecoin, the barista, the merchant, the vendor, they all learn my wallet address, right? And what's the problem with that? They can now see my entire financial history, past, present, and future. And even worse, I've just opted into allowing them to track my wallet for the rest of time. And I think that this is a huge fundamental breakage of the user journey of money. Say you want to buy an anniversary gift for your spouse. Well, being your spouse, they probably know your wallet address. They can just look up, like, when did he remember our anniversary is coming up? Where did they go buy this gift from? And most importantly, how much did they spend on my anniversary gift? And like, this is just a fundamental breakage of the UI UX of money. And so I think that there needs to be a much larger conversation around private stablecoins. And we've seen it, at least on the Aleo side, talking to a lot of the blue chip stablecoin issuers, that they're running into this exact problem, not just on the end user journey, but also on an enterprise and a business level, that they're losing deals because the technology doesn't support the user journeys that traditional banking expects.
Yeah, we usually work with regulated financial institutions, and now that stablecoins in the U.S. are legal tender, I mean, I still don't see Citadel moving variation margin with the whole world seeing what are their daily variation movements. But a lot of times people think that privacy is only for the institutional players and the regular, and I actually agree with Howard. I always say if Matt Gates knew that there was a privacy setting on Venmo, he probably would have used it, right?
All right, so
I
it's
think,
time to, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the, I think with privacy chains and specifically with private atomic interoperability between them, you can see very interesting network designs come to shape, right? So for example, a very common problem statement is, okay, tri-party intraday repo. You have a financial market intermediary that essentially is allowing for two different institutions to do a repo transaction. This one could be someone, generally someone like a State Street, etc. With private chains, and if you are able to do fully private atomic interoperability between them, you could essentially have three institutions, each run their own private chains, and they're facilitating atomic transactions between them. So I think the network design starts to get very interesting, and we've we're seeing some very interesting ideas of what people want to build with this type of use of privacy in zk.
All right. So it's time to conclude with one last question. So today I'm a wizard. I have a magic wand for each one of you that give you the opportunity to rebuild one crypto protocol from scratch with full privacy. Which one would you choose and why? You want to start, Howard?
I would say every DEX in DeFi would be rebuilt with privacy at its core, and the reasoning in my mind is that we've seen this entire issue around front running, around MEV, around arbitrage, because people can go and inspect the mempool and copy trade easily, and this is creating, in my mind, a perception that we're an immature DeFi market. If you want financial institutions to be using DeFi as a whole, there needs to be some level of guarantee that when I submit my transaction, that it's not going to be front run or copy traded or stolen by somebody else in the process, and the profits then are lost to the open market.
I think you were asking about the protocol, right? Yeah, a crypto protocol. For me, the obvious answer is Cardano. Here's why. Bitcoin being layer one, kind of the first one, just transfer of value, Ethereum programmability. I would want to start with like a third generation blockchain, and Cardano has been both sound in sense of it's not been hacked or anything. It has really decentralized governance that you don't see in other chains. It has the scalability, so it is kind of the best out of the third generation. I would start from there, and to Howard's point, add the privacy and some other elements that could take us into the future.
Robert.
All right, so unfortunately, Howard and I think too much alike, because I was going to say Uniswap as the example, but, and then I was thinking, okay, let me come up with something last minute, and I was going to say Bitcoin, but then I realized we probably wouldn't be here right now if Bitcoin were fully private, because we probably would not have seen that type of institutional adoption. So we're all lucky that the state of zk Tech wasn't where it was when Satoshi launched it. But yeah, I'll defer back to my original answer, which would be Uniswap. I think that would be fantastic to actually have private programmable liquidity.
Yeah, I agree on the Uniswap. I always say to people, would you accept NASDAQ front-running you if they knew the imbalance of the auction every morning? And people would say, no, throw them to jail, but in crypto, it's okay. Listen, as someone who has created an L1 protocol, I would actually say Ethereum. Ethereum was the first to come in and create a smart contract chain, and I actually think that if they were to think of privacy and did just copy the model of Bitcoin without thinking about kind of what they're trying to do, I actually think Ethereum would have been bigger than Bitcoin today.
Omar.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about L1 protocols, I'd probably say Ethereum as well. Although it is very interesting watching market stresses on Ethereum, because you can literally follow every single book to see, okay, where, at what level, what is going to break. Like I remember when Luna was happening, people were just following all the collateral pools on Aave. You couldn't do that if it was completely private, which I thought was very interesting to watch, like the entire market structure during a stress period like that.
Thank you so much. I think we are out of time, so thanks for the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.